Two members of the practicing press profession, Mr. DLewis, who is a reporter with the Tennessean, and Ms. LButler, who is also a reporter with the Tennessean. And let me welcome the two of you to Black Pulse. Mr. Lewis, we spoke with Mr. William A. Reed earlier in terms of black participation in the newspaper profession, and especially black participation in the white profession, the white press. And we feel that there ought to be some diversity within the white press, and we think that black people bring a certain kind of diversity to that. And we'd like for you to speak to that issue if you possibly could.
Well, I agree with you. I think if you just have one segment of the community writing about all the different segments, some segments of the community will not be covered. So if you have that diversity, maybe more or all segments will get covered.
Well, do you think that there is adequate diversity among the press in Nashville today in terms of their representation, ethnic representation?
Well, I think there's been a big improvement over the time when Bill Reed came to the Tennessee in 1965. You know, I can look today and our numbers are growing. But, you know, there's still a need for more. And, you know, just nationwide, 61% of the nation's newspapers have no non-whites on their staffs. And so there's a need for more minorities on those staffs.
Well, within that same frame of reference, Ms. Butler, you recently wrote an article in the Tennessean, I think it appeared the 5th of April, in reference to a conference that you attended dealing with this question of blacks in journalism. And I was wondering if you might be able to share some of that information with us.
Well, specifically covering a speech that Ben Johnson, who is executive director of the Multicultural Management Program in Columbia, Missouri, he spoke at this conference, and what he was saying is, don't be ashamed of being black. You know, carry your history, carry your heritage, carry your identity into the newsroom and use it to your advantage. And I think that's very important.
Well, do you think that that would mean the increase of the number of black people in the newspaper profession? How do you go about increasing the number of black people in the newspaper profession?
Well, one thing was the conference that we had last Saturday at Tennessee State University. It was sponsored by the black journalists in Nashville. It's Nashville Association of Minority Communicators. And this was the second conference that we had. Last year, Reginald Stewart, a Nashville native who works for the New York Times, was our featured speaker, featured luncheon speaker. And what we do, we have workshops, and they're geared mainly toward college students, but high school students are also welcome. And we have workshops on print reporting, broadcast, graphics, and trying to encourage more youngsters, more minority youngsters, to go into the newspaper and even also into television.
Now, what is the number of black people in journalism locally since you attended that conference last week?
Oh, I'm not sure of the numbers, but there are quite a few. You look at television, you see some people, Robin Roberts on the scene, you see Stephen Hill, newspaper, you see some reporters, but there are also people behind the scenes too. You know, there are positions like at the newspaper in sales and advertising, in television and production. So, you know, not only do you have to just be on camera or have your name on the front page or second front or whatever, but there are other positions.
Well, that's what we want to try to get across. We do recognize that the two of you are sort of out front. Both of you are practicing journalists, and both of you are published regularly. As a matter of fact, both of you did, I believe, to be an excellent series during Black History Month. But now, what about behind the scenes? As you indicated earlier, Ms. Butler, that Ben Johnson and others seem to believe that we ought to do more in terms of bringing the black image into our classrooms. But what about black ownership and other aspects of the media?
Well, that's another thing he addressed. He mentioned that, sure, it's a good idea to get blacks in newsroom, but the ultimate, the next step will be controlling and owning some of the media, the television stations, the newspapers, and sure, that is very important. But, I mean, we need to go to the first step, I guess.
Well, what would be the first step? Yeah.
Well, I agree. I think we need to encourage more young people. I think a lot of them are discouraged because the pay, at least in print journalism, is just so lousy at first. But you need to get them in there and get them dedicated, knowing that this is what they want to do.
Now, in other words, print journalism is generally the entrance level. You simply classify what you're doing as in print journalism as distinguished from visual journalism, or what?
There's the print side and the broadcast side. The broadcast is radio and television. The newspaper is the print side.
Now, what's with the wages in the print side of it?
Well, I think if you look at on the average, print reporters make more than broadcast reporters. but you have those a few broadcast reporters who make $50,000, $60,000, $80,000 a year. Those people who are on camera, the anchors. But overall, the average salary for the newspaper people are higher than television.
Okay, let me simply throw this out as a point of view. Recently, the chairman of the newspaper that you're working for, Mr. Alan Newhoff of the Gannett Service, came to town, and he said that one of the problems with the newspaper today, speaking of the Tennessean, USA Today, and et cetera, is that you don't criticize yourselves enough, that in many instances you criticize the president and the war policies and et cetera, but you don't look within yourselves. Now, do either of the two of you disagree with that? And if you agree, how do you see getting out of the box that he has put you in?
I don't disagree. I think newspapers are doing a better job of looking at themselves. I say newspaper industry, media too, in general. You know, some of the problems, there are a few problems. There are some problems.
Now, what are some of the problems then?
Well, we just talking, you look at the number of minority journalists. Some newspapers, 61% do not have minority journalists on their staffs. And it's our job, you know, to bring out this, to let people know this, and to try to get more, bring those numbers up.
Okay, and of course we saw that attempt made in the article that you wrote, Ms. Butler, but now are there other efforts that you're making in order to try to get this information out?
Well, looking at the problem, identifying the problem is really just not enough. I mean, you need to go about solving the problem, looking at the problem, compiling statistics saying how many non-white journalists we have is fantastic. But then we need a plan in place, I guess, to try to get more minority journalists in the newspaper, and not just as reporters and editors, or reporters and copy editors, but as in the management level also.
Now, what kind of plans do you think that we might be able to develop that would achieve that? That is to bring more in.
Well, if I could break in, the Detroit Free Press has a plan. For instance, every top-level person, or every, in some positions, in all their positions, before somebody is hired, a minority person has to, or a non-white person, has to be seriously considered for that job before a final decision is made. So that's one.
That's affirmative action, so
and this
to
is,
speak.
you know, on in-house. They came up with that themselves.
Well, now, how general or how widespread is that point of view?
Well, I'm sure various newspapers have their own ideas. There's no such policy at the Tennessean, but I think I'm sure the editors are looking at that, and some moves have been made. But you know, you have to stay on them, stay on editors all over the country.
Well, it seems to me that what the chairman of the largest news organization in the nation has said in reference to you, quote, staying on them, has been that this is what we ought to do. If the fact, for example, if we have 61% of our newspapers in this country who do not have minority employers, or whether they're in copy or wherever they might be, then it ought to be our responsibility from what the challenge that he's issued to deal with those kinds of situations and to write about those kinds of situations more than we're doing.
Yeah. Well, maybe a lot of times, you know, there are some programs. The American Society of Newspaper Editors have a program trying to encourage more minorities to go into the newspaper business. And from various times, reporters, you know, like myself and Lucretia, would travel to various college campuses, talking to students, trying to encourage them to do that. But I think Mr. Newhoff was also talking about some other things, like make sure, you know, we shouldn't go around just misquoting people that we interview. You know, make sure, you know, if we do that, let people, you know, admit our mistakes.
Sure.
So those are also some of the things.
Very good. Okay, have you got anything that you'd like to say, Ms. Butler, during the last 30 seconds that we have?
Well, yes, I'd just like to add, going to the college campuses is just not enough. Going to high school, making sure that the money is available and encouraging more minorities to go into journalism, to major in journalism, and to look at it as a profession is also very important. But making sure that the money is there.
Making sure that the money is
and more
there.
scholarships, more corporate, I guess.
And of course, I think your organization is doing something in terms of recognizing minorities through scholarship grants, is it not?
Yes, paper offer, you know, offer scholarships and internships. You know, this summer we'll have, I know we have 2 black students coming up from the University of Alabama.
Very good. And let me thank the 2 of you for coming by and talking about this very important issue today. And this is Dr. Haney, and we're going to have to take a break for a minute.